Good day to you, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Hypersonic 55 and I'm coming to you with another film review, and today's film review comes in the shape of Snow White and the Huntsman. Now, before this film came out, I was a little hesitant about watching it because, after watching Tim Burton's version of Alice in Wonderland, I was just like, oh no, we're going to be falling into that territory all over again. Now, don't get me wrong, Alice in Wonderland wasn't completely terrible, but the problem was before I saw the film, there was a lot of potential for the film to be absolutely fab, but the problem was that the film was executed in a really awkward and terrible fashion, and that's what made it so disappointing for me. So when I saw this film coming up, I was like, oh, we're just going to be living this same pain again. But to my surprise, I saw the film last week and it was actually pretty good, and I'm going to tell you why in this review. Now, the story of Snow White and the Huntsman goes a little something like this. So, Snow White, played by Kristen Stewart, happens to be a pretty lass, and she is also the fairest one in all the land, much to the disliking of the evil Queen Rowena, played by Charlize Theron. So the Queen, unable to tolerate anybody prettier than her being in existence, she decides that Snow White must die. So the Queen hires a huntsman, played by Chris Hemsworth, to go about and take Snow White out. But the huntsman finds himself unable to kill Snow White. Instead, he decides to become a protector, train her up, and make her a warrior capable of taking out the Queen and her evil reign. Now, the plot of this film happens to be done in a pretty decent way, actually. It takes the basic elements of what you know about Snow White, but reinvents them and changes them just enough to be a little different and to make you look at the film in a different way. The plot moves at a decent pace, and it introduces a lot of characters that I don't think people would be familiar with in the original sort of Snow White story. Now let's move on to the characters of the film. Now, Kristen Stewart as Snow White, she was actually tolerable in this film. Now, with Kristen Stewart, I make it no secret that I do not like this woman. After the Twilight films came out and all the clips that I've seen and what I'd heard from my friends, she just seemed like, a very annoying person. And she was one of the main reasons that I didn't want to watch this film, period. But to my surprise, she was actually pretty decent in the film. She was actually tolerable. She did a decent performance for what it was worth. And while she still happened to do that weird expression where she looks like she's constantly in pain, like she's got stomach cramps or something, she's otherwise fine, Now we move on to Chris Hemsworth as Eric the Huntsman. Now, I wanted to watch this film purely because Chris Hemsworth was in there, because I'm still riding on that hype of Chris Hemsworth as Thor. So when he happens to be thrown down and fighting in the film, I was just like, yeah, Thor, yeah! And he was cool. Outside of the fight scenes, he does happen to have a lot of weight to his character. He happens to have a history of pain, and he happens to drown his sorrows these days in alcohol and stuff like that. But he happens to be a pretty decent character with a good past, and that's what makes him, really cool. But the stand-up performance in Snow White and the Huntsman has to go to Charlize Theron as the evil Queen Rowena. She just relishes in her role. She is amazing. Charlize Theron just happens to be evil, cruel. She doesn't give a shit about any person besides herself, and her vanity knows no bounds. She just wants to be on top, and any person that gets in her way is just automatically destroyed. Charlize Theron is just incredible in this film, and yeah, clap clap, she is awesome. And the rest of the cast do well in their respective roles too. Now, the presentation of Snow White and the Huntsman is pretty cool as well. They happen to have a good few real life locations that happen to add that level of realism to the film, especially in this whole fantasy setting. And unlike Alice in Wonderland, that happened to use CGI to an extent where the film just felt like it was just too much computer generated imagery and not enough realism, Snow White and the Huntsman uses its CGI in a smarter fashion and happens to be a little bit more consistent and much prettier looking than Alice in Wonderland, in my opinion. It happens to be a very pretty film, and the soundtrack's pretty cool as well. It's not something that you remember for the rest of your lives, but for what it's worth, it was pretty decent. Now, Snow White and the Huntsman is not a perfect film. It does have a few issues with some of the characters that it introduces. Kristen Stewart's character is sort of overshadowed by Chris Hemsworth and Charlize Theron, and for all the good stuff that does happen in the movie, there are a few cliched moments where it's just but otherwise, the film is decent. Snow White and the Huntsman, I'd say go out and watch it. It's a decent summer movie, and yeah, you won't be wasting your money with it. It's fun. So overall, I'm going to give the film about a 7 out of 10. So yeah, that's been my review, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you found it informative, and look forward to the next one when it comes. So until then, this is the Hypersonic 55 signing out. Yo!